My wife texted from her girls' trip. Accidentally slept with my ex. We're getting back together, and I am keeping the ring for future. I replied, thanks. Then I emailed the $87,000 ring bill, which was in her name, and then Thursday night, 11:23 p.m., and I was exactly where any self-respecting 29-year-old man should be on a random weeknight, planted on my couch in boxers and a Nirvana t-shirt I'd been wearing since Tuesday, absolutely demolishing some kid from Portugal in FIFA Ultimate Team. The score was 4-1, my favor, and I just pulled off this absolutely disgusting finesse shot with Mbappe that curved like it had GPS tracking. The kid rage quit before I could even watch the replay, which honestly was the most satisfying part of my entire week. My wife Sabrina had been gone for 5 days on what she called a much-needed girls' trip to Miami, which apparently involved a lot of poolside selfies, overpriced cocktails with names I couldn't pronounce, and her college friends pretending they still had the metabolism of 21-year-olds. I wasn't complaining, though. I'd been living like a feral bachelor, eating cereal straight from the box, leaving dishes in the sink overnight without getting a passive-aggressive lecture about our shared space, and falling asleep to ESPN without someone sighing dramatically every 15 minutes. The apartment was quiet except for the ambient stadium noise from the TV and the occasional honking from the street below our downtown condo. I was in that perfect zone of existence where nothing hurts, nothing matters, and you're just vibing with artificial crowd sounds and the glow of a 65-inch screen. Then my phone buzzed on the coffee table, dancing across a stack of unopened mail and an empty bag of Cool Ranch Doritos. I figured it was probably Sabrina sending another group photo with her friends doing that awkward, "we're having so much fun" pose that women do when they're 3 margaritas deep and trying to prove something to Instagram. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick it up. Maybe instinct, maybe boredom, maybe the universe deciding it was time to hit me with a plot twist I absolutely did not order. The text was from Sabrina, and the preview on my lock screen just said, "Hey babe, this is super awkward LOL." I unlocked my phone with my thumbprint, and that's when my Thursday night officially upgraded from chill to what in the actual hell. The full message read, "Hey babe, this is super awkward LOL. But I ran into my ex, Travis. We accidentally slept together. I realized I'm not over him. We're getting back together. Sorry this is so last minute." I sat there staring at the screen like my brain was a Windows 95 computer trying to load a 4K video. The little dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. She was typing more, which somehow made it worse. The follow-up message came through like a freight train of audacity. "By the way, I'm keeping the ring. It's a clean break gift. I'll use it for my future with Travis. Don't contact me." I read it once, then twice, then a third time, just to make absolutely certain I wasn't having a stroke or hallucinating from too many energy drinks. Accidentally slept together. Those 3 words kept bouncing around my skull like a DVD screensaver. What kind of gymnastics do you have to do to accidentally sleep with someone? Did she trip on a margarita-soaked pool deck and fall directly onto his? No, you know what? I wasn't even going to finish that thought. And clean break gift. Was that even a thing? Did Hallmark make a card for that? Congratulations on your divorce. Here's a ridiculously expensive ring I'm stealing. Best wishes, go screw yourself. The sheer nerve, the unbelievable confidence it took to text your husband that you cheated, you're leaving, and oh by the way, you're keeping the engagement ring like it's a parting gift from a game show. I almost had to respect the hustle. Almost. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I could have written a novel. I could have sent paragraph after paragraph about betrayal, about the 3 years we'd been together, about the wedding we'd been planning for 8 months that was supposed to happen in 6 weeks. I could have asked her if she'd lost her mind somewhere between the hotel minibar and whatever terrible decision-making led to this moment. I could have called her every name in the book and then invented a few new ones. But instead, I took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of petty energy I had in my body, and typed one single word. Thanks. No punctuation, no elaboration. Just, thanks, like she'd just told me she grabbed milk from the store. I hit send and watched the little delivered notification pop up underneath it. Then I just sat there in the eerie quiet of my living room with the FIFA menu music looping in the background. That annoying upbeat electronic garbage that's designed to make you feel like you're always one game away from glory. The TV screen had gone into idle mode, showing my poorly customized avatar standing in the digital stadium looking way more confident than I felt. My beer was getting warm on the coffee table next to a pile of fantasy football magazines I'd been meaning to read. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 15 minutes ago, but somehow the entire molecular structure of my life had shifted. I realized I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even particularly angry, which was the weirdest part. I was just sitting there in my 2-day-old shirt, holding my phone, feeling this bizarre sense of clarity wash over me like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room I'd been stumbling around in for months. Sabrina and I hadn't been good in a while. I knew that. She knew that. Probably our mailman knew that from the way we'd barely acknowledged each other in the elevator for the past few weeks. But we'd been going through the motions, doing the whole we're fine performance for our families and friends, planning a wedding that felt more like a corporate merger than a celebration. She'd been obsessed with Pinterest boards and seating charts while I'd been wondering why I felt more excited about my Tuesday night basketball league than about marrying someone I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with. Still, there's knowing something's wrong, and then there's getting a text that your wife accidentally mounted her ex-boyfriend like he was a Peloton bike she forgot to cancel the subscription for. The silence in the apartment was thick, almost physical, like I could reach out and touch it. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat and wonder if you're having an appropriate reaction to your marriage spontaneously combusting via text message. Somewhere in the building, someone's dog was barking. A siren wailed past on the street below. My phone buzzed again, probably her blocking my number, but I didn't even look. I just sat there, controller in one hand, beer in the other, and let the weight of it all settle on my shoulders like the world's most unwelcome blanket. And weirdly, underneath the shock and the absurdity and the sheer what the hell just happened of it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Free. The thing about getting dumped via text by your wife, who's currently banging her ex in a Miami hotel, is that it gives you this weird superpower, clarity. Suddenly, all those little financial details you'd been ignoring because happy wife, happy life, or whatever bumper sticker wisdom you'd been operating under just come flooding back with crystal clear precision. I sat there on my couch for maybe another 10 minutes, letting the reality marinate, and then something clicked in my brain like a light switch being flipped by a very petty electrician. That ring. That goddamn ring she was planning to wear while building her future with Travis, like it was some kind of romantic heirloom instead of what it actually was, an $87,000 debt bomb with my name all over the payments. Let me back up and paint you the full picture of this financial disaster, because it's honestly a masterpiece of bad decisions and male stupidity. 6 months ago, Sabrina had dragged me to this boutique jewelry place in the fancy part of downtown, the kind of place where they buzz you in like you're entering a bank vault and immediately offer you espresso from a machine that probably costs more than my car. The jeweler, this guy named Marcus who wore more rings than Johnny Depp and had an accent I couldn't quite place but screamed, "I'm going to separate you from your money with European charm," sat us down at a glass table and started pulling out diamonds like he was dealing cards at a very expensive poker game. Sabrina's eyes lit up like a kid in a candy store, except this candy store sold compressed carbon for the price of a decent used BMW. She'd done her research too, which should have been my first red flag. She had screenshots on her phone, printouts from wedding blogs, and a whole folder of inspiration that basically translated to, "I want something that will make my college friends feel inadequate on Instagram." She kept using words like clarity and cut quality and statement piece, which I now realize was code for financially irresponsible flex. We're talking about a 3.7 carat diamond, custom designed in some setting that Marcus assured us was very modern, very investment worthy, which is jewelry speak for, "You're about to pay double what this is worth." The price tag made my stomach drop like I was on a roller coaster. But Sabrina had this look in her eyes, that mix of desire and determination that I'd learned over 3 years meant I was going to lose this argument before it even started. Here's where it gets really good, though, and by good, I mean spectacularly stupid on my part. Sabrina insisted on opening the jeweler's credit line in her name. She sold it to me as this genius financial move, talking about how it would boost her luxury credit profile for future big purchases, how it would diversify her credit mix, How all the influencers and financial advisors she followed on TikTok said this was smart money management. I, being the supportive fiancé who was trying really hard to be the kind of modern husband who doesn't control his partner's financial decisions, said sure, whatever makes you happy. What I didn't fully process at the time was that while her name was on the credit agreement, I was the one who set up automatic monthly payments of $2,900 from my checking account to hers, which she would then use to pay down the balance. It was this convoluted system that made zero sense, but she'd explained it with enough confidence that I just nodded along like an idiot. So now, sitting in my living room at almost midnight, still wearing my crusty Nirvana shirt and experiencing what I can only describe as an out-of-body level of spite, I opened my laptop. The blue light illuminated my face like I was a hacker in a bad movie, except instead of breaking into government databases, I was about to perform some financial surgery that would have made my accountant father actually proud of me for once. I logged into my bank account, navigated to the recurring payments section, and found that beautiful $2,900 monthly transfer scheduled to go out in 3 days. My mouse hovered over the cancel button for exactly 2 seconds before I clicked it with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for popping bubble wrap or crushing an empty beer can. Canceled. Done. Finito. That's $2,900 a month that could now go toward literally anything else. Therapy, a new gaming setup, hiring a skywriter to spell out, Travis is getting an $87,000 surprise over Miami Beach. But I wasn't done. Oh no, I was just getting warmed up. I opened my email and found the most recent statement from the jeweler that had been forwarded to me back when Sabrina and I were still pretending to be a functional couple. The balance sat at exactly $87,000. She'd made exactly one payment, apparently, before deciding that was enough effort. I downloaded the PDF, opened a new email, and addressed it to Sabrina's Gmail account, the one she used for all her personal business, which apparently now included cheating and grand larceny. The subject line practically wrote itself, per your text. In the body, I kept it simple and devastating. This is all yours now. Thanks. Then I attached that invoice like I was serving her legal papers, which, let's be honest, I basically was. My finger hit send with the force of a judge's gavel, and I watched that email whoosh into the digital void, headed straight for Miami, and whatever hotel room she was probably still in, probably scrolling through Travis's Instagram, trying to convince herself she'd made a good life choice. The petty energy was flowing through me now like I'd mainlined espresso and spite in equal measure. I pulled up the smart lock app for our condo and changed the entry code from the one we'd been using, her birthday, because of course it was, to a random string of numbers I'd have to write down to remember. Changed. Locked out. She wanted a clean break? Here's the cleanest break possible. No way to get back in even if she changed her mind between mojitos. Next up was the divorce lawyer, and luckily I had one on speed dial. Well, not literally speed dial, but saved in my contacts from when my buddy Marcus, different Marcus, not the jewelry thief, had his whole got married in Vegas to a bottle service girl and needed an annulment incident last year. I fired off an email at 12:47 a.m. explaining my situation in the most professional terms I could manage while still riding high on my revenge tour, and asked for a consultation as soon as possible, preferably before Sabrina realized what was happening and tried to lawyer up first. Then came the wedding vendors, and let me tell you, there's something deeply cathartic about canceling a wedding at 1 in the morning while eating stale Doritos and riding the world's most justified anger high. I'd saved all the contracts in a folder labeled Wedding Stuff that I now wished I could rename Expensive Mistakes and Broken Dreams, but I settled for just opening each one and finding the cancellation clauses. The venue. Canceled. Lost the $5,000 deposit, but honestly worth it to not have to stand at an altar and pretend everything was fine. The photographer who charged $4,000 and acted like she was doing us a favor. Canceled. The DJ, the florist, the overpriced catering company that wanted $85 per person for chicken that probably came from Costco. Canceled, canceled, canceled. Each email I sent felt like dropping weight off my shoulders, like I was literally deleting the future we'd been planning and replacing it with blessed nothing. By 2 a.m., I was running on fumes and spite, but there was one last thing sitting on my kitchen counter that needed to be dealt with: a box of wedding invitations. Not just any invitations, mind you, but the custom-designed, letterpress, ivory cardstock with gold foil invitations that Sabrina had insisted were essential for setting the right tone. These things cost $1,700 for 150 invites, which broke down to over $11 per piece of paper, basically telling people to show up and watch us lie to each other. I picked up that beautiful, expensive box, walked to the trash chute in the hallway, and dumped the whole thing down like I was scattering ashes at sea, except way less sentimental and way more satisfying. I stood there for a second, listening to them tumble down 4 floors to the dumpster below, and smiled for the first time in hours. Somewhere in Miami, Sabrina was sleeping next to Travis. And somewhere in my downtown condo, I was finally free. For 5 glorious days, I lived like a man who'd just been released from a prison I didn't even know I was in. I'm talking pure, unadulterated freedom. The kind of existence where you wake up at noon on a Saturday not because you're depressed, but because you genuinely have nothing to do and nowhere to be and no one to judge you for it. I drank my coffee black at 3 in the afternoon, left the toilet seat up without consequences, and discovered that my apartment could actually be quiet instead of filled with reality TV noise and the constant hum of Sabrina's anxiety about whether we were living our best life or whatever phrase she'd picked up from her influencer friends that week. I ordered Chinese food at midnight just because I could, left the containers on the counter until morning, and no one materialized to give me a lecture about ants or maintaining our space like adults. I deep cleaned my side of the closet and discovered I actually had way more room without Sabrina's 73 pairs of shoes that all looked identical to me, but apparently served very different purposes according to her. I found shirts I'd forgotten I owned, a favorite hoodie that had mysteriously disappeared 6 months ago when she declared we were dressing more mature now, and about $40 in random pockets from various jackets I hadn't worn since she started picking out my outfits. I played guitar for the first time in probably a year, working through old John Mayer riffs and not worrying about someone sighing dramatically from the other room about how the noise was interfering with her decompression time. I made eggs for dinner, just eggs, nothing else, scrambled with too much butter and hot sauce, and ate them standing at the counter while watching YouTube videos about conspiracy theories. It was glorious. It was peaceful. It was exactly the kind of existence that makes you realize you'd been living in low-key misery for longer than you wanted to admit. My buddy Jake came over on day 3 with a case of beer and a pizza from this place we used to hit up in college, back before Sabrina had declared that carbs after 7 p.m. were basically poison, and that we needed to be more conscious about our food choices. We sat on my couch, watched an entire baseball game without anyone asking if we could please watch something with a plot, and he didn't ask a single question about Sabrina or Travis or the text message that had blown up my life. He just showed up, cracked open a Budweiser, and said, "Dude, your apartment feels different. Like, less tense or something." That was it. That was the whole conversation, and it was perfect. We didn't need to process or analyze or talk about our feelings like we were in some kind of male therapy session. We just existed in comfortable silence, punctuated by occasional commentary about terrible umpire calls and whether the Cubs would ever get their act together. I slept like a rock for the first time in months, sprawled diagonally across the bed, without someone complaining that I was invading her space, or that my snoring was preventing her from achieving proper REM sleep. I woke up naturally, without an alarm, and spent 20 minutes just lying there staring at the ceiling, thinking about absolutely nothing. I went to the gym and actually enjoyed it instead of treating it like a chore I had to complete so Sabrina wouldn't make comments about how we needed to stay in shape for the wedding photos. I ate cereal for dinner 2 nights in a row, Cinnamon Toast Crunch straight from the box, standing in front of the open fridge, living my best feral bachelor life. And nobody was there to judge me or suggest we meal prep quinoa bowls for the week like responsible adults. But all good things, as they say, must come to an end. And my peaceful little post-breakup vacation came crashing down on Tuesday afternoon when my phone started blowing up like I'd won the lottery, except instead of money, I'd won the grand prize of other people's audacity and entitlement. It started with a voicemail from Trina, Sabrina's maid of honor and partner in crime. One of those women who refers to herself as a girl's girl, but is really just an enabler of bad behavior wrapped in a Forever 21 bodycon dress. I was at the grocery store, standing in the chip aisle trying to decide between Cool Ranch and Nacho Cheese Doritos, a decision that felt monumentally important in my new simple life, when I saw I'd missed a call. I put the phone on speaker and hit play, fully expecting it to be a spam call about my car's extended warranty, but instead, I got Trina's voice dripping with that particular brand of fake concern that women use when they're about to ask you for something unreasonable. "Hey Noah," she started, using that overly familiar tone like we were best friends instead of people who'd been forced into proximity by my soon-to-be ex-wife. "So, Sab's card got declined at dinner last night." "Yeah, super awkward. We were at this really nice place on Ocean Drive, and her Amex just didn't work. And then she got some weird email from the jeweler about a missed payment or something." There was a pause where I could literally hear her chewing gum and probably checking her reflection in a compact mirror. "Can you just, fix it? She's really embarrassed, and she doesn't want to call you directly because things are weird right now. But it's just a technical thing, right? Just log in and move some money around, or whatever you need to do." "Thanks, babe." She actually called me babe. The woman who'd helped my wife cheat on me just called me babe and asked me to fix a financial problem that was entirely of Sabrina's own making. I stood there in the Doritos aisle, holding my phone like it was a live grenade, while some mom with two screaming kids in her cart navigated around me and shot me a look that said move or die. I replayed the message just to make sure I'd heard it correctly. And yep, Trina had really just asked me to fix the fact that I'd stopped paying for the ring that my cheating wife was planning to wear while building a future with another man. The sheer entitlement, the absolute lack of self-awareness, the confidence it took to leave that voicemail without apparently seeing any irony in the situation. It was almost impressive. Almost. I deleted the message without responding, grabbed both bags of Doritos because screw choosing, and headed to the checkout line, already bracing myself for whatever fresh hell was coming next. And come it did, about 3 hours later, right as I was settling into a dinner of leftover pizza and a beer. My phone rang with a number I recognized immediately because it had been programmed into my contacts with the label Patricia, Danger. That would be Sabrina's mom, Patricia Morrison, a woman who'd perfected the art of passive-aggressive warfare and could make you feel guilty for things you didn't even do. She was one of those mothers who still called her 30-year-old daughter my baby and treated every boyfriend or husband like a temporary employee who was probably going to be fired soon. I let it ring twice while debating whether answering would be worth the entertainment value, then figured what the hell, might as well see how deep this rabbit hole goes. "Noah," she said without preamble, her voice carrying that particular tone that wealthy white women use when they're about to lecture someone they consider beneath them. "We need to discuss this situation with Sabrina's ring payment." She called me absolutely distraught, darling. Distraught. She said you forgot to make the payment, and now her credit score is going to be affected. She said forgot, like it was a genuine possibility, like I was some kind of absent-minded professor who'd just overlooked a minor detail rather than a man who'd been cheated on and deliberately cut off payments to a debt that wasn't his responsibility. I took a long pull from my beer, savoring the moment before I responded. "Patricia, I didn't forget anything. Sabrina left me, via text, to get back together with her ex. She explicitly said she was keeping the ring. So the ring, and all financial obligations attached to it, are now exclusively her problem." I kept my voice even, professional almost, like I was explaining a business transaction rather than the collapse of a marriage. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, the kind of sound people make when they're not used to being contradicted. "You can't just stop paying, Noah. That's punishing her for a mistake. My daughter made a mistake, and you're being vindictive and small about it." Her voice had risen about 2 octaves, and I could practically see her clutching her pearls in whatever overpriced yoga outfit she was probably wearing. "A mistake," I repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air between us. "Patricia, she didn't accidentally leave her phone in an Uber. She bought plane tickets to Miami, checked into a hotel, reconnected with her ex-boyfriend, slept with him, multiple times, I'm assuming, since this resulted in them getting back together, and then sent me a text message ending our marriage. That's not a mistake. That's not even a series of mistakes. That's an itinerary. That's a planned event with multiple decision points where she could have, not done that." The silence on the other end was beautiful, like I could hear her brain short-circuiting as she tried to figure out how to spin this into somehow being my fault. Well, she finally sputtered. You must have driven her to it somehow. Sabrina wouldn't just. People don't just. She couldn't even finish the sentence, too caught up in her delusion that her precious daughter was somehow the victim in this scenario. There's nothing to fix here, Patricia, I said, finishing my beer and tossing the bottle toward the recycling bin. Sabrina made her choices. She can live with the consequences. Have a great evening. And I hung up, powered off my phone, and sat there in my peaceful, drama-free apartment, knowing damn well this was just the beginning. I'd made it exactly 72 hours past the Patricia phone call before the universe decided that peace was overrated and I needed more chaos in my life. It was Friday evening, around 8 p.m., and I was doing what any reasonable newly single man does on a Friday night. Absolutely nothing productive. I'd ordered Thai food, cracked open my third beer of the evening, and was halfway through a documentary about some guy who climbed Mount Everest without oxygen, which seemed like a reasonable metaphor for my current life situation. My phone had been blissfully quiet all day after I'd blocked about 15 numbers including Trina, Patricia, and a few other members of Sabrina's entourage who apparently thought they had any business in my life. I was in that perfect zone of relaxation where your brain finally stops running through all the terrible scenarios and just lets you enjoy pad thai and other people's bad decisions. Then the intercom buzzed. Not a polite single buzz either, but that aggressive, repeated buzzing that means someone downstairs is leaning on the button like they're trying to trigger a fire alarm. I paused the documentary. The guy was literally about to summit, rude timing, and walked over to the intercom panel by my door, already knowing in my gut that my peaceful evening was about to get spectacularly ruined. I pressed the talk button, and before I could even say hello, Sabrina's voice came screaming through the speaker at a volume that probably violated noise ordinances. Noah, open the goddamn door. The code doesn't work. I know you're up there. Your car is in the garage. Stop being petty and let me in. I need to get my things. Her voice had that particular quality of someone who's used to getting their way through sheer volume and persistence, and I could hear traffic noise in the background along with what sounded like someone else saying something I couldn't quite make out. I looked at the intercom like it was a snake that had just appeared in my kitchen, took a deep breath, and pressed the talk button again. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice conversational and calm, which I knew would irritate her more than yelling back. The code doesn't work because I changed it, and that's intentional. You texted me that you weren't coming back. You said don't contact you. So I'm respecting your wishes and maintaining my boundaries. I said boundaries like I'd been watching therapy TikToks, which honestly I had been. There's some solid content out there about dealing with narcissists, and it was proving very educational. You can't just lock me out of my own home, she shrieked, and I could practically see her face turning red, that vein in her forehead popping out that always appeared when she didn't get her way. I have rights. I live here. This is illegal. I'm calling the police. And then the intercom went silent as she apparently hung up or stormed away or both. I stood there for a second, shrugged, and went back to my couch. If she wanted to call the cops, let her. I had the deed to the condo in my name only. I had her text message saying she was leaving, and I had a really good documentary to finish. The guy still had to get down the mountain, which statistically is when most people die, and I was invested in his survival. I got about 30 minutes of peace. The guy made it down alive, spoiler alert, though he lost some toes to frostbite, which seemed like a reasonable trade-off for bragging rights, before there was a knock on my door. Not the intercom this time, an actual knock, and it had that particular authoritative quality that meant this wasn't the delivery guy with my Thai food leftovers. I looked through the peephole, and sure enough, there were 2 uniformed police officers standing in my hallway, and behind them I could see Sabrina with mascara-streaked cheeks doing her best impression of a damsel in distress, and next to her, some guy I assumed was the infamous Travis, looking exactly like every ex-boyfriend named Travis looks. Backwards baseball cap, tight t-shirt showing off gym muscles, and that particular expression of confused aggression that men get when they're in over their heads, but too proud to admit it. I opened the door, and immediately the older of the 2 cops, a black guy probably in his late 40s with tired eyes that said he'd seen way too much stupid stuff in his career, held up his hand in a gesture that was both greeting and caution. Evening, sir. I'm Officer Williams. This is Officer Chen. We got a call about an illegal eviction. Ma'am says you changed the locks and won't let her access her residence. He said it in that carefully neutral tone that cops use when they're already pretty sure the call is bullshit, but have to go through the motions anyway. Officers, I said, nodding politely and stepping aside so they could see into my apartment. One dude, one couch, one TV, 0 women's belongings anywhere in sight. Come in. I can explain the situation, and I have documentation. I said documentation like I was a lawyer, which I wasn't, but I'd learned from enough true crime podcasts that having paperwork makes you look credible. Behind the cops, Sabrina made a move to follow them inside, and Officer Williams held up his hand again without even looking back. Ma'am, please wait in the hallway for a moment. His tone suggested this wasn't a request, and Sabrina's mouth dropped open like she couldn't believe she was being excluded from her own victimhood narrative. Travis put his hand on her shoulder in what I guess was supposed to be a supportive gesture, but mostly just made him look like a guy who was starting to realize he'd signed up for way more drama than he'd bargained for when he decided to sleep with his ex-girlfriend in Miami. I grabbed the folder I'd prepared, because yes, I'd actually prepared a folder once I'd canceled all those wedding vendors. I wasn't completely naive about how this might go down, and handed Officer Williams the deed to the condo. The property is solely in my name. I bought it 2 years ago, before Sabrina and I got married. She never contributed to the mortgage, never paid utilities. Her name isn't on any documentation related to this address. I watched him flip through the pages, his partner Officer Chen looking over his shoulder, both of them doing that thing cops do, where their faces don't reveal anything they're thinking. Okay, Williams said slowly. But if she's been living here, even without her name on the deed, she may have established tenancy, which means you can't just. He started to explain, probably gearing up for the standard tenant rights speech, and I held up my phone, which I'd been smart enough to screenshot every message from that Thursday night before Sabrina could delete anything or claim it never happened. She sent me this text 5 days ago, I said, pulling up the screenshots and handing him my phone. She explicitly states she's leaving me, getting back together with her ex. That would be the guy in the hallway with the unfortunate facial hair situation, and that I shouldn't contact her. She voluntarily left the residence and communicated in writing that she wasn't coming back. She removed herself from tenancy. I was pulling out phrases I'd learned from a 30-minute YouTube video about tenant law that I'd watched at 2 in the morning earlier in the week, and honestly, it was paying off. Officer Williams read the text message once, then again, then looked up at me with an expression that might have been sympathy, or might have been amusement, or might have been both. She really wrote accidentally slept together, he asked, and I saw the corner of his mouth twitch like he was trying not to smile. Officer Chen leaned in to read it too, and I watched her eyebrows go up so high they almost disappeared into her hairline. Yep, I said, accidentally, like she tripped and fell into a romantic reconciliation in Miami. These things happen, apparently. I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice, and honestly, I didn't try very hard. Officer Williams handed me back my phone and walked to the door, opening it to where Sabrina and Travis were huddled in the hallway, trying to look pitiful and failing miserably because Sabrina was wearing Gucci sneakers and Travis was checking his phone like he had somewhere better to be. Ma'am, Officer Williams said, his voice taking on that firm quality that meant the conversation was basically over. Your husband has shown me documentation proving sole ownership of this property. And he's shown me text messages where you explicitly state you're leaving the relationship and not coming back. This clearly indicates voluntary abandonment of the residence. This is not an illegal eviction. This is a domestic matter that you'll need to resolve through the appropriate legal channels, meaning divorce court, not the police department. Sabrina's face went through about 5 different expressions in rapid succession: shock, anger, disbelief, more anger, and then this calculating look that I recognized as her. I'm about to say something I think is really clever face. But before she could launch into whatever speech she'd prepared, Travis, sweet, stupid Travis, decided this was his moment to be a hero. He stepped forward, puffing out his chest like a rooster about to fight, and pointed at Sabrina's hand where that massive diamond was catching the hallway light and probably blinding passing airplanes. Wait a minute, Travis said, his voice cracking slightly like he was going through puberty again. She's wearing an $87,000 ring. He gave it to her, and now he's trying to steal it back. That's theft. That's actual theft. You should arrest him. He looked so proud of himself, like he'd just solved a murder case, and I watched both cops turn to look at him with expressions that suggested they were reconsidering their career choices. Officer Chun, who hadn't said much up to this point, looked at Travis, then at Sabrina's hand where the ring was indeed very much present, then back at Travis. "Sir," she said slowly, like she was explaining something to a particularly dim child. "She's wearing it. Right now? On her finger. He's not trying to steal it. It's literally on her hand." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife, and I watched Travis's face go through its own journey of realization as he understood that he'd just made himself look like an absolute moron in front of two police officers and his new old girlfriend. The smug, heroic expression slid off Travis's face faster than a cheap air mattress deflating after someone sat on it too hard, replaced by this red-faced embarrassment that almost made me feel bad for him. Almost. Officer Williams sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested this wasn't even close to the dumbest call he'd responded to that week, looked at me, and nodded. "You folks have a good evening." "Ma'am, sir, I suggest you handle your personal business through a lawyer, not through the police department." And with that, both officers turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving Sabrina, Travis, and me standing in the most awkward triangle formation imaginable. Sabrina looked like she wanted to say something, her mouth opening and closing, but apparently even she couldn't find words for this particular disaster. I gave them both a small wave, stepped back into my apartment, and closed the door, finally getting back to my now cold Thai food and my peaceful Friday night. I thought after the cop incident that maybe, just maybe, Sabrina would take the hint and handle things through proper legal channels like a normal adult human being going through a divorce. I thought wrong. Because apparently when you're the kind of person who accidentally sleeps with your ex and then tries to keep an $87,000 ring like it's a participation trophy, you're also the kind of person who thinks rules and social norms are more like gentle suggestions that don't really apply to you. I discovered this delightful personality trait exactly 1 week after the police visit, when I went down to check my mail and found my mailbox absolutely exploding with correspondence like it was Christmas morning at a hoarder's house. I'm talking stuff to the point where the little metal door wouldn't even close properly, with envelopes and catalogs and various pieces of mail jammed in there at impossible angles like someone had been playing Tetris with my postal delivery. I stood there in the lobby of my building at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd taken the week off work because my boss had taken one look at my face when I explained the situation and said, "Go home, figure your life out. We'll see you when you're ready," and just stared at this explosion of paper products wondering what fresh hell had manifested overnight. I started pulling stuff out, and immediately my confusion turned into that very specific kind of anger that comes when you realize someone is actively trying to screw you over in a new and creative way. Neiman Marcus catalog. Addressed to Sabrina Morrison, my address. Sephora VIP member magazine. Sabrina Morrison, my address. Restoration hardware furniture porn. Sorry, I mean catalog. Sabrina Morrison, my address. Then the real fun stuff started showing up. A late payment notice from American Express, a credit alert from Experian, a reminder about an overdue balance from Nordstrom, and my personal favorite, a collections notice from the jewelry company that was apparently not thrilled about the $87,000 ghost payment situation. Every single piece of mail, all probably 25 or 30 items, was addressed to Sabrina at my condo, using my unit number, establishing a paper trail that suggested she still lived here, even though she very clearly did not, and had not for over a week. I gathered the entire pile against my chest like I was carrying a very annoying baby and took it back upstairs to my apartment, spreading it all out on my kitchen counter in a formation that looked like a crime scene evidence board. This wasn't accidental. This was strategic. This was Sabrina, or more likely Sabrina on the advice of whatever bargain basement lawyer she'd probably found on Yelp, trying to establish continued residency at my address so she could claim tenant rights or complicate the divorce or just generally make my life more difficult because she was apparently the kind of petty that gives petty people a bad name. I took a picture of the whole spread with my phone, sent it to Alex, my lawyer, the guy who'd helped my buddy Marcus with his Vegas marriage disaster and who I'd officially hired 3 days ago after our consultation meeting, where he'd laughed so hard at my situation he'd actually cried, and waited for him to call me back. It took about 15 minutes. "Noah," Alex said when I answered. And I could hear him still chuckling in that way lawyers do when they encounter something so absurdly predictable that it's almost adorable. Let me guess. You checked your mail today. Alex was one of those guys who seemed perpetually amused by human stupidity, which I guess is a good quality in a divorce lawyer since his entire job is basically dealing with people at their absolute worst. He was probably in his early 50s, had an office that looked like it belonged in a movie about Boston lawyers, even though we were nowhere near Boston, and charged $400 an hour, which seemed expensive until you realized he was worth every penny. My mailbox looks like Sabrina's shopping addiction threw up in it, I said, picking up the American Express notice and reading the balance. $12,000. Jesus Christ, what had she been buying? Everything's addressed to her at my place. I'm assuming this is some kind of scheme. I tried to sound calm and reasonable, but my voice probably gave away the fact that I was about 3 seconds away from driving to wherever Sabrina was currently staying and dumping all this mail on her doorstep like a very pointed care package. It's an old trick, Alex explained, and I could hear him typing in the background, probably taking notes or billing me for this call or both. She's trying to establish continued residency through mail delivery. The logic is that if she can show she still receives mail at that address, she can argue she never really left, that the text message was sent in emotional distress, that you illegally evicted her, blah blah blah. It's not a great strategy, honestly, especially since we have that text message in the police report, but it's annoying enough that we need to shut it down immediately. More typing. Here's what we're going to do. Gather every single piece of mail addressed to her. Write, return to sender. Addressee does not live here on each one. Don't open anything. Don't throw anything away. Just mark it and put it back in outgoing mail. Do this with every piece of mail you receive for her from now on. We're creating our own paper trail showing that she doesn't live there and that you're not accepting mail on her behalf. It sounded simple enough. Tedious, but simple, like most things related to divorce seem to be. Got it, I said, already looking around for a marker. Anything else I should know? Any other fun tricks she might try? I was learning that divorce was apparently like a very expensive, very stressful game of chess where your opponent kept trying to flip the board over and claim they'd won. Just document everything, Alex said, his standard advice that he'd probably given to 1,000 clients before me. Take photos, save emails, keep records. If she tries to have packages delivered there, refuse them at the door. If she shows up in person, don't engage, just call me. The more professional and by the book you are, the better you look when this inevitably ends up in front of a judge. He paused. And Noah, don't write anything stupid on the mail. No snarky notes, no commentary, just the standard return language. I know it's tempting, but trust me, it's not worth it. I spent the next hour at my kitchen counter with a thick black Sharpie, carefully writing, return to sender. Addressee does not live here, on every single piece of mail. The catalogs were easy, just one line across the address label. The bills and notices required more precision since I didn't want to obscure any important information that might be needed later. There was something deeply satisfying about it, this repetitive task that felt like I was actively fighting back against Sabrina's schemes one envelope at a time. Each stamp of the Sharpie was like a small victory, a tiny declaration that no, she didn't live here anymore. No, she couldn't just pretend nothing had changed. And no, I wasn't going to make her life easier by forwarding her mail or accepting her packages or any of the other things that a reasonable ex-spouse might do in a normal divorce. The restoration hardware catalog was particularly thick, probably 60 pages of overpriced furniture that all looked vaguely the same, and I spent a solid minute debating whether to flip through it first just to see what kind of stuff Sabrina had been fantasizing about buying with money she didn't have. But Alex's voice echoed in my head. Document everything, stay professional, don't give her ammunition. So I just marked it up and added it to the pile. The collections notice from the jewelry company was harder to mark without feeling a surge of vindictive joy. This was the consequence of her decisions, the paper manifestation of her hubris and greed, and the belief that she could just take an $87,000 ring and face no repercussions. I wanted to write something snarky on it, maybe good luck with that, or hope Travis has good credit, or even just a smiley face, but I restrained myself and stuck with the standard language. When I was done, I had a neat stack of about 30 pieces of mail, all clearly marked, all ready to go back into the postal system. I took another photo of the stack, sent it to Alex with a caption that just said, "Mission accomplished," and headed down to the lobby. Our building had an outgoing mail slot near the mailboxes, one of those brass deals that looked fancy, but was probably installed in 1987 and hadn't been updated since. I stood there feeding each piece of mail through the slot, watching them disappear one by one, imagining them making their way back through the postal system to wherever Sabrina had submitted her change of address form, landing on her doorstep or in her temporary mailbox or wherever she was currently hiding out with Travis. The mailman, Jerry, who I'd seen around the building for the past 2 years and had always seemed like a solid dude, came through the lobby door just as I was finishing up. He was probably in his 60s, black guy with gray at his temples, and the kind of weathered face that comes from spending decades outside in all kinds of weather. "Hey Noah," he said, nodding at me and then noticing the pile of mail I was holding. "Everything okay? That's a lot of returns." His tone suggested he'd seen this kind of thing before, probably dozens of times in his career. The aftermath of breakups and divorces and roommate situations gone wrong all played out through the United States Postal Service. "My wife moved out," I said, keeping it simple because Jerry didn't need the whole story. "She's trying to pretend she still lives here." I'm correcting the record. I held up the last few pieces of mail, all clearly marked with my Sharpa declaration. Jerry nodded slowly, understanding crossing his face, and adjusted his mail bag on his shoulder. "Yeah, I've seen that before. Had a lady on my route once who kept changing her ex-husband's address to her place, then refusing his mail, then changing it back, then refusing it again. Went on for like 6 months until a judge told them both to knock it off." He shook his head. "People get weird about mail when relationships end, like it's the last thing they can control or something." He gave me a sympathetic look. "Just keep returning it. Eventually the system figures it out. And hey, at least you're being civil about it. Some people write some really nasty stuff on those returns. I've seen things that would make your grandmother faint." I thought about the note I'd considered writing. "Also, please take your delusions with you," and smiled. "Yeah, my lawyer said to keep it professional. No commentary, just the facts." Jerry nodded approvingly and continued on his route, leaving me standing in the lobby with my empty hands and a small sense of accomplishment. It wasn't much, just mail, just paperwork, just another tedious task in the endless series of tedious tasks that apparently made up the divorce process. But it felt like progress, like I was actively dismantling her attempts to maintain control, one return catalog at a time. If there's one thing I learned during this whole divorce circus, it's that some people will believe absolutely anything if it's packaged with the right amount of emotional manipulation and fake tears. Sabrina, being the kind of person who'd probably convinced herself that she was actually the victim in this situation, had apparently decided that her next move wasn't to lay low and deal with her consequences like an adult, but instead to launch what I can only describe as a full-scale sympathy tour, a pity PR campaign designed to rewrite history and paint herself as some kind of wronged woman who'd been forced into the arms of her ex-boyfriend by my apparent failures as a husband. I discovered this delightful development on a Wednesday morning when I was making eggs, actual breakfast eggs at a normal breakfast time, another small victory in my new single life, and my phone dinged with an email notification that made me nearly drop my spatula into the garbage disposal. The email was from Melissa Chun, the wedding photographer Sabrina had insisted we hired despite my protests that maybe, just maybe, we didn't need to spend $4,000 on someone to take pictures of us awkwardly posing in front of decorative hay bales or whatever rustic nightmare venue Sabrina had picked out. Melissa was one of those Instagram photographer types who referred to herself as a visual storyteller and had a website full of couples gazing into each other's eyes in fields during golden hour, looking like they'd never had a single argument about whose turn it was to take out the trash. The email subject line read, "Thinking of you during this difficult time," which immediately set off alarm bells because nobody who starts an email like that is about to tell you good news or offer you money. I opened it while my eggs were slowly turning from scrambled to rubber on the stove and had to read it 3 times before my brain could fully process the audacity. "Dear Noah," it began, already irritating me because we'd maybe had 2 conversations total and she definitely didn't know me well enough to dear me. "I hope this email finds you well. Sabrina reached out to me yesterday and shared what you're going through. I'm so sorry to hear about your struggles during this challenging season of life." My struggles. My struggles. Like I was the one who torpedoed my marriage via text message from a Miami hotel room. As someone who works with couples in their most vulnerable moments, I understand how difficult separation can be, and I want you to know that I'm here to support you both through this transition. The email continued, and this is where it went from annoying to absolutely buck wild. Sabrina mentioned that she and Travis are hoping to do a fresh start couple session to celebrate their reunion and new beginning together. She asked if we could apply your $2,200 deposit toward their shoot, which I think is a beautiful example of turning pain into growth and allowing love to bloom even from difficult circumstances. I actually said, "What the hell," out loud to my empty apartment, startling myself with the sound of my own voice. She wanted to use my deposit, my money, that I'd paid 6 months ago for a wedding that was never going to happen because my wife had decided to upgrade to her ex-boyfriend, to take romantic photos of said wife with said ex-boyfriend. The mental gymnastics required to present this as somehow reasonable or beautiful or an example of love blooming was Olympic level. But wait, there was more, because Melissa apparently wasn't done demonstrating her complete lack of professional boundaries or basic common sense. I believe in the power of new beginnings and the importance of documenting love in all its forms. If you're open to this, it would mean so much to Sabrina during this healing process, and I think it would show tremendous grace and maturity on your part. Please let me know your thoughts when you have a chance. Sending you light and positive energy during this time of transformation. Light and positive energy. She'd signed off with light and positive energy like she was some kind of spiritual guru instead of a person who was basically asking if she could steal my money and use it to photograph my ex-wife's new relationship. I stood there in my kitchen, holding my phone in one hand and a spatula in the other, my eggs now completely destroyed and stuck to the pan, trying to decide if I was more angry or impressed by the sheer boldness of this request. This was next-level entitlement, the kind of thing you'd see in a Reddit thread where everyone in the comments would be saying, "This can't be real. Nobody is actually this clueless," except it was real and happening to me in real time. I briefly considered responding myself. Maybe something along the lines of, "Dear Melissa, absolutely not. Also, please consider taking a class on professional ethics and maybe basic human decency." But I'd learned my lesson about handling this stuff directly. Instead, I forwarded the email to Alex with a message that just said, "Can you believe this?" and went to make new eggs because these ones were unsalvageable, much like my faith in humanity. Alex called me back within an hour, and I could hear him laughing before he even said hello. "Noah, my guy, I've been practicing law for 23 years and I thought I'd seen every possible variation of people being terrible to each other during divorces. But this is genuinely a new one. She wants to use your money to take engagement photos with her new boyfriend? Or old boyfriend? Whatever he is." He was still chuckling, that deep laugh that suggested he was going to tell this story at lawyer happy hours for years to come. This is actually insane. Like, clinically, objectively insane. I'm billing you for this call, but honestly, I should be paying you for the entertainment value. So I'm assuming my answer should be no? I said, scraping my ruined eggs into the trash and starting over for the third time because apparently I couldn't cook and deal with emotional turmoil simultaneously. Or is there some legal reason I have to let her steal my deposit for her romantic photo shoot with the guy she cheated on me with? I was being sarcastic, but also genuinely asking because divorce law was apparently full of weird loopholes and technicalities that made no logical sense. "Oh, hell no," Alex said, his lawyer voice kicking in now, "all business. That deposit is yours. You paid it for services that are no longer being rendered because your wedding was canceled due to your wife's infidelity. The photographer has no legal right to transfer it to another client without your explicit consent, and you are absolutely not giving that consent. I'm going to send her a response that's professional but very, very clear about why this is not happening." I heard him typing, probably already drafting the email. "And Noah, this is actually good for us. It shows that Sabrina is continuing to act in bad faith, trying to take things that belong to you, trying to manipulate service providers into giving her free stuff. This is the kind of behavior that makes judges very unsympathetic." The email Alex sent to Melissa was a masterpiece of professional passive aggression. I got CC'd on it about 30 minutes later, and it opened with, "Dear Ms. Chun, I represent Noah Harris in his divorce proceedings. He has forwarded me your recent email regarding the misappropriation of his wedding photography deposit. Misappropriation. I love that he went straight for legal terminology that made it sound like a crime, which honestly it kind of was. The email continued. Please be advised that the $2,200 deposit paid by my client is his property and was rendered for specific services related to his wedding to Ms. Morrison, services which are no longer needed due to circumstances beyond my client's control. Beyond my client's control, nice way of saying, because his wife cheated on him without actually saying it. But the real kicker was the closing paragraph. Any attempt to transfer, apply, or otherwise utilize my client's funds for services benefiting Ms. Morrison and her companion would constitute theft of services and breach of contract. My client does not consent to such use under any circumstances. Furthermore, if Ms. Morrison wishes to book photography services with you, she should do so using her own financial resources rather than attempting to appropriate funds that do not belong to her. This pattern of behavior is well documented and will be presented in divorce proceedings as evidence of financial impropriety and bad faith dealings. Alex had attached case law citations at the bottom, probably just to make it look extra official and intimidating, though I had no idea if they were even relevant or if he just pulled them from a random folder to pad the email. The best part was the sign-off. Please confirm receipt of this email and your understanding that Mr. Harris's deposit will be refunded in full per the terms of your original contract, or held for potential future use by him exclusively. Any further attempts to coordinate with Ms. Morrison regarding my client's financial accounts will be considered harassment and dealt with accordingly. I could practically hear the threat in those words even though Alex had never explicitly said what accordingly meant. It was beautiful, professional, and absolutely devastating. Melissa responded within 2 hours. Apparently, the combination of legal terminology and the threat of being accused of theft had motivated her to suddenly become very professional. Her email was brief and devoid of all the light and positive energy nonsense from before. Mr. Harris, I apologize for any confusion. Your deposit will remain in your account and will not be transferred or used for any other clients. If you would like to request a refund, please let me know. Thank you for your understanding. No mention of Sabrina, no mention of fresh starts or new beginnings, no mention of grace or maturity or any of the emotional manipulation she'd tried before. Just a straightforward business response from someone who'd suddenly remembered that being a photographer didn't give her license to play therapist or financial advisor. I never responded to her directly. Alex said it was better to leave it there, let her sweat about whether I was going to push for legal action or just let it go. The truth was I didn't particularly care about the $2,200 at that point. I'd already written off way more money in wedding deposits and the ring payments and all the other financial debris of my imploded marriage. But the principle mattered. The fact that Sabrina had actually called up our wedding photographer, spun some sob story about my struggles, and asked to use my money for her new relationship photos. That was the kind of behavior that needed to be shut down immediately and firmly. Not because I was vindictive, though let's be honest, I was feeling pretty vindictive at that point, but because if I let her get away with it once, she'd try it again with the caterer, the venue, the DJ, every vendor we booked, systematically trying to transfer or steal or manipulate her way into getting free stuff on my dime. I'd been divorced from reality long enough at this point, about 3 weeks into this nightmare, that I thought I'd seen every possible way Sabrina could try to twist the situation in her favor. I'd dealt with the mail scheme, the cop visit, the photographer heist attempt, and approximately 47 text messages from various members of her friend group explaining why I was actually the bad guy in this scenario despite, not being the one who'd cheated. So when Alex called me on a Thursday morning and opened with "sit down for this one," I actually laughed because what else could possibly happen? Turns out, I was adorably naive about just how low this whole situation could sink. Sabrina hired a lawyer, Alex said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Well, hired might be generous. She found someone. His name is Mitchell Brandenburg, works out of a strip mall office between a vape shop and a place that does eyebrow threading. His website has a stock photo of a gavel and the tagline "Fighting for Your Rights" in Comic Sans font. Alex paused for effect. Noah, I'm going to be straight with you. This guy is either completely incompetent or he didn't bother to read any of the case facts before drafting this demand letter, because what I'm holding in my hands right now is possibly the most legally absurd document I've encountered in my entire career, and I once had a case where a guy tried to sue his ex-wife for custody of their shared Netflix account. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, pretending to work from home, but actually just scrolling through apartment listings, because even though this condo was mine, the whole place felt contaminated now with Sabrina memories that I wanted to escape. How bad are we talking? I asked, already bracing myself because Alex's tone suggested this was going to be entertainingly terrible. What's she asking for? The condo? My kidney? Firstborn child I don't have. Try $125,000, Alex said, and I heard him flip through pages. Let me read you the breakdown because it's truly spectacular. First, she wants the full $87,000 for the ring debt, which she's claiming you manipulated her into opening because, and I'm quoting here, the defendant used his superior financial knowledge and emotional influence to trick the plaintiff into assuming debt that was meant for their shared future. Superior financial knowledge. Noah, you work in IT project management. You're not Warren Buffett. You didn't manipulate anyone into anything. She wanted a massive ring. She signed the credit application herself, and now she's mad about the consequences. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache forming behind my eyes. Okay, that's insane but predictable. What's the other $38,000 for? Emotional damages from me being mean enough to stop paying for her jewelry after she cheated on me? The sarcasm in my voice was thick enough to spread on toast, but Alex wasn't done destroying my morning. Close, he said. She's claiming $25,000 in emotional distress damages because you publicly humiliated her by changing the locks and forcing her to involve law enforcement, which caused her severe anxiety and reputational harm. And then there's $13,000 for something her lawyer is calling credit rehabilitation costs, which is apparently what it's going to cost to repair her credit score after, again, quoting, the defendant's financial sabotage campaign. Financial sabotage. You stopped paying for a ring she stole. That's not sabotage. That's just basic cause and effect. But apparently Mitchell Brandenburg missed that day in law school. I let out a laugh that sounded slightly unhinged even to my own ears. So let me get this straight. She cheated on me, dumped me via text, stole an $87,000 ring, tried to move back into my condo with police assistance, attempted to steal my photography deposit, and is now suing me for $125,000 because I had the audacity to not continue funding her terrible life choices? Did I miss anything, or is that the complete list of how I'm apparently the villain here? Oh, there's more, Alex said, and I could hear the grin in his voice because he was clearly enjoying this on some level, probably because he knew exactly how this was going to play out. Brandenburg's letter includes a whole section about how you failed to provide adequate emotional support during your marriage, which drove Sabrina to seek comfort elsewhere. He's actually trying to argue that your emotional neglect is what caused her to cheat. Therefore, you're partially responsible for the current situation and should pay for damages. It's victim blaming dressed up in legal terminology, and it's not going to fly even a little bit, but the balls on this guy to actually put it in writing are kind of impressive. I stood up from my kitchen table and walked to the window, looking out at the city below, where normal people were going about their normal Thursday mornings, probably not dealing with strip mall lawyers trying to extort them for six figures. What's our response? Please tell me our response involves some variation of go to hell, but in fancy lawyer language. I was only half joking because at this point, I was tired of being reasonable and professional and taking the high road when Sabrina and her Comic Sans attorney were clearly operating in a different moral universe. Better, Alex said, and I heard his keyboard clicking. I'm drafting a response right now that's going to include every single piece of evidence we have. The text message where she admits to cheating and says she's keeping the ring. The police report showing she voluntarily left and tried to force entry later.